Welcome to Module 3 of Supply Chain Risk Management, Module 3. This week we're going to build on what we've covered. We started with, what is this issue of supply chain risk management? Why now? Why is it a big issue for what's going on in the world of supply chain? And then last week we looked more specifically and said, well, what does it mean for a supply chain to be resilient, to really be able to bounce back, to recover quickly? This week's going to be a little different. We're going to back out our lens to look at a macro view. And rather than looking at individual companies and individual supply chains, we're going to look at industry sectors. And so we're going to look try to generalize a bit and say, well, given the history, the evolution, the supplier base, the characteristics that make up this industry, what are the inherent risks then? And they differ by industry. There's certainly overlap between industries, but we're going to develop together a framework of questions or characteristics, if you will, of supply chains and be able to rate them for various supply chains. Then we'll just keep moving through this topic. So this is week 3 of 10. So our learning objectives, again, will be to understand what those defining characteristics are and for us to be able to build a framework that we can use in order to evaluate industries and specifically their susceptibility to risk. We'll then use that framework and we'll specifically look at transportation as a source of risk. So industry sector, keep in mind that that's a very aggregate look at what we're doing, and certainly we could look at the defense industry and know that there's a lot of differences within that. We can look at food, we can look at consumer packaged goods, and so forth. The way this chapter is organized, though, is it's going to help us with some of the characteristics we might draw into our framework, and then it's going to dive into, I believe, 6 or 7 specific industries in order to apply it. So we're going to have a fairly traditional week this week. You're in the module intro video now. I would encourage you to next hit the Module 3 content video that I put together. Before you read the chapter, I take a little bit more of a structured approach than our author of the textbook does. And so I've incorporated some of his elements in a little different way, and I think it'll make reading the chapter a little bit easier. Remember that you'll have your multiple choice quiz out there that is due kind of mid-late week. Then read the article. There'll also be homework questions out there and a required discussion forum. So a fairly rich week for us. Let me give you another little kind of perspective to please adopt as we move forward in this online course, and that is that the discussion forum is what I would call is a formative learning assignment. And the reason it's listed as a formative is because I want to use those required discussion forums to help form your knowledge about the topic. So please read the chapter, take a look at the module content video before you dive in on the discussion forum. The reason being is that you could just shoot from the hip on many of these discussion forum questions, but to get the most credit possible and to really get the greatest value out of them, we really want to take the material that we're learning that week and apply that to the discussion question, not just your experience, not just your best guess at what I'm looking for, but to really integrate and to kind of test your understanding of the material. And then through the feedback and through reading other people's posts, you will form and clarify and get greater strength to your understanding of that week's material. Then culminating in what I would say is our summative assessments, and the summatives being the quizzes, but you also get some feedback on that, so that kind of bridges formative and summative. But the real summative one is normally the homework question. So in that homework question, again, you could just shoot from the hip and throw some things together, but in order to get the most credit in it, I'm really looking for you to apply the discussion, the materials we've been covering that week, the chapter that week, and really show me that you understand those materials and how they apply to our question. So that just to let you know what's going on in the background as I look at this course is that we're forming pockets of knowledge, silos of knowledge each week. And hopefully each week then we break out of that silo a little bit and draw some pieces from prior weeks, and we start to really build a dynamic working knowledge of supply chain risk management. So a little behind the scenes story so that you can get the most out of this course. Keep in mind that as we go through this chapter, our author is going to provide some elements of a characteristic framework for evaluating industries, and then he's going to go through and apply it to some sample industries, and it's those industries that we often are fairly familiar with. So they're high-level industries, and certainly many of us will work in other industries. But I think by applying this framework to some working industries and industries that we may have some understanding of, we should be able to then gain in our knowledge of that framework and those characteristics enough that we could apply them to any industry. So watch for that as you go through the chapter. It may get a bit tedious because it's almost a series of 7 case studies of these 7 different industries. So suggestions, again, start with the Module 3 content video. I'm going to propose a framework in there based on the characteristics that are provided in our chapter. And then I'm going to encourage you to then take that and adapt it and improve on it as you see fit to build out an even stronger framework. And then as you read the chapter, be using that framework that you could pull those pieces together. Read the article, jump in on the required discussion. As usual, I'd like you to put some initial comments out there by Wednesday and then see what kind of feedback and other discussion comes up and wrap it up later on the week. And of course, we'll have our homework out there for you to show me how you can pull all those pieces together.